Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
After months of negotiations and wrangling, there's been a significant breakthrough today after British and EU negotiators finally agreed on a draft text for how the United Kingdom will leave the EU next year. Cabinet ministers are being called in to see the Prime Minister one by one tonight to discuss the proposals before they are put before the full Cabinet tomorrow afternoon. They've also agreed an outline political declaration, effectively what our future relationship with the EU will look like after we leave. Our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, is in Westminster for us tonight with the latest. Laura.
Well, Sophie, it's more than 2 years since that referendum made the national decision to leave the European Union. Theresa May has had to cope with a divided cabinet, a divided Tory party and daily disagreements with Brussels. But now, at last, the cabinet has in front of them a draft agreement of our divorce with the European Union. These are 24 hours now of huge opportunity, but huge danger for the Prime Minister too. Our first report tonight contains some flash photography.
Do you think a deal's within reach that you could sign up to?
Agreement is finally in Number 10's grasp. A document that's been the source of dispute for so long. At last, the plans, the compromises will go before the Cabinet tomorrow. And then we'll know whether they approve the divorce with the EU in all our names.
Well, we're obviously working hard on this final phase of the negotiation, this final stage. I think we should remain positive on getting a good deal for our country and taking our country forward and looking beyond Brexit and getting on with the job. So that's what we're doing.
But don't forget, many of the Cabinet have a less rosy view. Number 10 might struggle to get their wish to agree the so-called Withdrawal Agreement before autumn's out. Desperate to broker a pact at home and abroad by the end of the month.
Well, I think it's a step forward. There are clearly a number of hurdles to be gone through, and it appears that the government has got over the first of these by agreeing a text.
Chancellor, and you have the floor.
If Cabinet sign up, well then there's the rest of the EU to confirm. The German leader today still expressing regret that Brexit's happening at all.
Mit Großbritannien wird erstmals ein Land die Europäische Union wieder verlassen.
Great Britain's soon to leave, Angela Merkel said. This is a deep wound. But after a summit with the EU, the government faces the heavy toil of Parliament. A few dozen Tories and all the opposition parties are poised to vote against Theresa May's plan, almost whatever it is. And there is just no way that some Brexiteers will ever come on board.
For the first time in 1,000 years, this Parliament will not have a say over the laws that govern this country. It is a quite incredible state of affairs. It will mean that we are having to accept rules and regulations from Brussels over which we have no say ourselves. It is utterly unacceptable to anybody who believes in democracy.
Remember, the Prime Minister has no majority on her own here, and there's no sign that Labour are willing to come to her aid.
Given the shambolic nature of the negotiations, this is unlikely to be a good deal for the country. Obviously, we'll wait to see the detail, but we've made it clear on a number of occasions if it doesn't meet our test, we won't be voting for it.
Is there a deal, Mr. Hancock?
Tonight, ministers have a chance to read through the hundreds of pages of legal text that will shape our country for years to come.
Are you confident you'll be able to get the Cabinet behind this?
If, and it is a big if, the Cabinet and then Parliament can actually agree.
Our Europe editor Katya Adler is in Brussels. We'll speak to her in a moment, but first to Laura in Westminster. And as you say there, this is by no means a done deal, is it? There's still a very, very long way to go.
There is. I mean, the government has today moved forward a significant step. There's no question about that. But cabinet ministers in the last 24 hours have told me privately they don't believe what might be on the table tomorrow will be acceptable. Some even suggesting that Theresa May should walk away there rather than accept the terms. We'll see tomorrow whether any of them have the courage of what they say privately actually to reject the deal or to quit their jobs if they really hate it that much. I think that is unlikely, although at this stage it is not impossible. But after that, Theresa May would have to get rubber stamping from the rest of the European Union formally at a summit in a couple of weeks or so. And then the battle royal, taking this deal through the Houses of Parliament, where we know there's already been an eruption of resistance from those Brexiteers. And remember, Theresa May does not have a majority in the House of Commons on her own. And at this stage, we just can't know if the meaningful vote on a Brexit deal will be pulling off what has at times seemed politically impossible, or a vote that goes the wrong way for the Prime Minister that sinks the government and her career.
And Katya Adler in Brussels, what has been the reaction to this news there?
Well, Sophie, muted, if not almost silent. This doesn't mean, of course, that nothing's going on. It means that those in the know just don't want to speak publicly at the moment. I mean, one of my contacts actually sent me an emoji, Sophie, with a closed zipper instead of a mouth. So what do we think we know? Well, we think that at a technical level, so between EU and UK negotiators, there has been some kind of mutual understanding. This does not mean that a deal has actually been done. Earlier in the day, we heard from the first Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. He said that progress is definitely being made, but that we're actually not there yet. The 27 EU ambassadors meet here in Brussels tomorrow. Now, they were always scheduled to meet, but there is a sense of excitement, something going on, because the timing of that meeting is being moved. They might be told that decisive progress is being made now in these negotiations. The choreography is unclear, but what you need to remember, Sophie, it's not just the UK cabinet that has to approve any technical deal, if you like, but also every single EU member state will want to pore over it in detail.
Katya Adler in Brussels, Laura Koonsberg in Westminster. Thank you both. Meanwhile, the company behind brands such as Bisto, Oxo and Mr. Kipling says it's going to start stockpiling raw materials in case there are delays at ports after Brexit. Premier Foods said it has to prepare because of a lack of certainty over arrangements for the UK's departure from the EU next March. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson is here. They're really that worried then?
Well, the company was stressing today that this was just a precautionary measure, that only around 15% of its raw materials comes from the EU. But in the last few weeks, it has decided to start stockpiling some ingredients and packaging. For instance, dried egg powder in those Mr. Kipling cakes, bottle tops, and this will mean tying up some £10 million in working capital. In other words, that's money that the company has to pay up front. And it says it might start stockpiling some finished food products in the new year. Now, Premier Foods is one of our biggest food manufacturers, and it was updating investors today on its Brexit plans as it announced its half-year results. But there are a lot of other companies right now at a crunch point. They want to know what to do with their supply chains and making investment decisions. They still haven't got certainty tonight.
Emma Simpson, thank you.
A Brexit deal finally appears to be in sight tonight after a draft agreement was reached between the UK and the EU. The two sides have agreed the technicalities of withdrawal that would solve the Irish border issue. It comes just in time for the EU to call a November summit, but nothing can progress any further until it is accepted by MPs, and that's starting, of course, with the Cabinet. Theresa May is briefing key ministers right now ahead of a high-stakes meeting in Downing Street tomorrow afternoon. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent Romilly Weeks on the Brexit breakthrough.
So here we go. The Prime Minister promised we were reaching endgame. Tonight, that game is on.
Is there a deal, Mr. Hancock?
One by one, ministers are being called back to Downing Street to be briefed on the agreement hammered out over long nights in Brussels.
Will you be backing this deal, Mr. Grayling?
Tomorrow there'll be an emergency cabinet where the Prime Minister hopes the text will be signed off.
The negotiation team has been working through the night, as you know, for the last few weeks, and that we're hopefully on the cusp of beginning to get to the point where we're delivering on Brexit in a really practical way.
And it's this man in the Mac, Geoffrey Cox, the government's legal advisor, who's now key. His views on the dense 500 pages or so of legal text coming out of Brussels will have a crucial impact on whether the deal can be sold to the Prime Minister's sceptical cabinet. And if that's problem number one, this is where the Prime Minister will hit problem number two, getting a deal through Parliament. And within moments of the news of an outline deal emerging, Boris Johnson declared this.
If it is as in the reports, it really is about as bad as you could possibly imagine. It is vassal state stuff. We are going to be kept in a kind of economic and political captivity, unable to shape EU legislation, regulation, but having to accept it ourselves, not being able to do free trade deals. And the kicker is that we haven't even really protected the union.
The DUP, who the government relies on for support, no more positive.
I think it's very difficult at the moment to see how the government gets what's been suggested as its deal through. We have to wait and see what the actual deal is. But certainly I think, following Joe Johnson's resignation and the hardening of views, as I take it, across all sections of the Conservative Party and indeed some Labour Party members as well, I think it's difficult to see how Theresa May takes a deal which doesn't deliver control in a true sense in terms of Brexit or anything which would break up the United Kingdom through the House of Commons.
Labour's Brexit secretary, who this afternoon forced the government to agree to releasing its legal advice on the final deal to MPs, hardly reassuring either.
This is unlikely to be a good deal for Britain. We'll look at the detail, but we've been very clear that if it doesn't meet our conditions, our tests, then we'll be voting against it.
But there will be relief in government tonight that the negotiations have reached this point at last. An EU summit this month is now possible if the cabinet fall into line. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Westminster.
So lots to discuss here, obviously. In a moment, live to our political editor, Robert Peston in Downing Street. But first, to Angus Walker in Strasbourg. So, Angus, how is the EU then reacting tonight?
Well, the Brussels-based bureaucratic wheels are starting to turn. Now the technical talks have ended. This becomes a huge political exercise here in Europe. The text, as it's being seen by the UK government, once it's through Cabinet, if it gets through Cabinet, it will go to 27 member states. They will all pore over the withdrawal deal text as well. Countries with big fishing fleets, for example, will be looking specifically for anything they may object to. Some countries want the whole text translated into their language. How much could be lost in translation, perhaps? And as the Cabinet meets tomorrow, ambassadors will be meeting in Brussels as well, which means that the chances of a November summit are still very much alive, a summit to seal any possible deal.
OK, Angus Walker in Strasbourg, thank you. Let's go straight now to our political editor, Robert Peston in Downing Street. Robert, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? How big a moment is this?
Well, this is the moment that the Prime Minister has been working towards since she first entered 10 Downing Street on July the 13th, 2016. A 500-page withdrawal agreement has now been broadly agreed between the UK and certainly officials representing those governments, and a only five pages outline of what our future relationship will be with the EU. Now, Cabinet ministers have until tomorrow morning to pore over the detail. They're not allowed to take these documents away with them because the Prime Minister doesn't trust them not to leak what's in there. They're being locked in a room in the Cabinet office if they want to know what's happening. So tonight, she is hoping that none of them will resign. She can't be certain of that, but this is only the first of the hurdles she has to get through, because as we speak, I've been talking to MPs of all shades of opinion, Brexiter and Remainer, and they're all saying on the basis of what they see so far, they would vote against this. So by no means clear that this deal will get through.
OK, Robert Peston in Downing Street, thank you.
Here at Westminster, we have all been consumed by the political labyrinth of Brexit. But what about the children of the EU migrants who've been calling this place home for years? For them, Brexit is personal. Where do they belong?
I just feel like I have to become more Scottish now to fit in with British society, and just try to fit in here to make sure I can stay here.
So, senior cabinet ministers have been summoned. A draft Brexit deal with the EU is on the table, but the real work is only just beginning, selling it to the cabinet, to Parliament, and of course to the country at large. Brexiteers certainly aren't impressed. Former Tory leader Ian Duncan-Smith insisting that even if the cabinet agreed it, the Conservative Party certainly would not. while Jacob Rees-Mogg declared that white flags have gone up all over Whitehall. Labour too are threatening to vote it down if it doesn't meet their 6 tests. Well, our political editor Gary Gibbon is with me. Gary, the question tonight is this: what do we actually know?
What do we actually know? We know there are 2 documents sitting in Downing Street. One of them is a 500-page, we think, withdrawal agreement. The other is a 4-page outline political declaration. That's the future relationship. Tells you really that they have only done about half their homework in this negotiation. They haven't got on to the really meaty stuff of what is the future relationship. We know that ministers, a select few ministers, I think we're probably right in describing them from Theresa May's view as the awkward squad, are being called in for one-on-one chats with her and her policy chief, Gavin Barwell, and all ministers are being called in to read through as much of those 504 or so pages as they possibly can.
That's a lot of reading.
It is a lot of reading, and a lot of difficult reading, and it's a lot of reading that will come fresh to people, because you said this is agreed at a technical level, and what that means is that negotiators have gone into secret, what is in jargon, EU jargon terms called the tunnel, secret talks. They haven't been going back and referring back to politicians. This applies to EU politicians as well. So we now move into the interaction with real politicians. Remember, the EU 27 might have some views about some of the stuff that's in this treaty, but so will the people around that table, and so very critically for Theresa May will her partners in government, the people who prop her up, the DUP, and it could well be that's where the problems start. One of the key things in this whole agreement is the Northern Ireland backstop that the EU came up with, the idea that as Britain leaves the single market and the customs union, Northern Ireland somehow stays in those institutions. She's been trying to rub that out of the agreement. Actually, I think some people who've been close to this process think it is probably still there. It's been sort of broken down like kidney stones, but it is still in there, and it is still, as far as the DUP are concerned, extremely toxic. The other thing I'm hearing is that it is possible that there are barriers, for instance, on fisheries going backwards and forwards across the Irish Sea, and also that the whole mechanism by which we would move towards the temporary customs arrangement, all of that will be done perhaps on a sliding scale. We only get the frictionless movement that we want in a temporary customs arrangement if we are sticking to single market rules. All of that, I think, will raise some concerns in government and, as I say, on the backbenches and amongst the DUP. Here, anyway, is how the day went in Westminster.
Is it time to walk away from the talks, Brexit Secretary?
A few hours after they left today's meeting, Cabinet Ministers heard they were being summoned back tomorrow. Long hours of negotiating have produced a text Theresa May might be ready to present to Parliament. A moment of truth, long delayed, could be approaching. In Strasbourg, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, was briefing commissioners on the talks so far. The Commission briefed out plans for what would happen if there was no deal. The Vice President of the Commission spelling out that if Britain got heavy, imposing visas on EU visitors, for instance, the EU would retaliate.
If there is no deal, we need to be prepared. And then the basic message here is, we'll do upon you what you will do upon us. So, just have visa-free travel on both sides, and that will make life easier for all our citizens.
Do you know, I don't know why you stand outside my flat every morning. You never get anything.
The morning doorstep vigils at the homes of cabinet ministers like Esther McVey, thought most likely to walk out over any deal, may soon be over. Number 10 is calling in ministers one by one in the hope it can win them over to the draft deal and stop any resignations.
Morning, Mr. Rabb. I almost worry if you're not here anymore.
Some resignations could be more survivable than others. Mrs May couldn't, for instance, lose a second Brexit secretary after David Davis's resignation. In March, this was a glimpse of one part of the draft agreement as work in progress. Green meant agreed, yellow nearly there. No highlighter, no agreement yet. And the area that took longest to colour in was the backstop arrangement. How do you stop checks going up on the currently unmarked border between Ireland and Northern Ireland as the UK leaves the EU? Recently, the EU has bowed to the UK demand to have a temporary UK-wide customs arrangement. But some Brexiteers are convinced that's a ploy to lock the UK into EU institutions, and they're saying so before they've even seen the text.
If it is as in the reports, it really is about as bad as you could possibly imagine. It is vassal state stuff. We are going to be kept in a kind of economic and political captivity, unable to shape EU legislation and regulation, but having to accept it ourselves, not being able to do free trade deals. And the kicker is that we haven't even really protected the union.
He was piling pressure on those who stayed in the cabinet to quit now, including fellow Brexiteers like the International Trade Secretary Liam Fox. He and the Health Secretary are amongst the first to have one-on-one meetings with the Prime Minister and to take a look at a Brexit treaty that is said to run to 500 pages.
The Prime Minister's going to be working hard to get the best deal for the country, and it could be, let's see how it goes tomorrow, but it sounds as if we're moving things on.
The UK's lead official at the negotiations, Ollie Robbins, has also brokered a declaration on the future relationship. The detailed negotiations on that don't start until after Brexit next year. Some ardent Remainers say if not too much changes in the meantime, they might back the Prime Minister.
I realise I'm going to have to be pragmatic and just see how much you preserve. So long as the agreement preserves open borders for as long as it takes, that's all borders, British borders with Europe, no barriers to trade and investment, for as long as it takes to decide what we're going to change to, if we're going to change, I will vote for it. Falls short of that, chances are I shall vote against it.
A rare emollient voice tonight as hardline Brexiteers brief out the line to take and rush to the microphones.
I think you can take it that this is a widespread feeling across the ERG.
A counter-attack is on the way if there's a cabinet-approved deal to sell.
Our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Well, the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, emerged from number 10 a few minutes ago. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I think that the important thing tonight is that we will actually look at what's been tabled. I've talked to the Prime Minister about where she thinks we've got to. I've said that I think all the Cabinet will need to read this through, we'll need to discuss it tomorrow afternoon. The important thing is that we do what's best for Britain, what's best for the United Kingdom, and that we deliver a Brexit that the British people will feel fulfills the terms of the referendum.
Well, with me now is the Shadow Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, have you seen what this deal is all about? Have you seen the details?
We haven't seen the details, but we know from the negotiations just how shambolic they've been, and therefore this is highly unlikely to be a good deal.
You're
from the country.
prejudging it then?
We will look at the detail of it, but obviously we've been watching very, very closely what's been going on, very close to the negotiations, been working here, talking to people in Brussels, and therefore, given where the government has been throughout this episode, this is unlikely to be the breakthrough. This is unlikely to be good for the country. And you've seen the reaction to it already.
But hang on, it sounds as if you're already telling me now, without having seen the details of this deal, that you are probably going to say that it does not pass your 6 tests and therefore will be voted down.
Well, at the very beginning of the process, when the Prime Minister started, we said these are the conditions if you want our support at the end of the exercise. We've been at this for 18 months, watching every twist and turn. And it looks to me like the Prime Minister is a long way from home on our tests. Obviously, we will look at it, we'll look at the detail. But as I say, given the shambolic way, this has not been a negotiation that is, as it were, genuinely in the national interest. It's been a negotiation about what can the Prime Minister get past her cabinet.
But the Chief Whip, Julian Smith, said tonight on camera, on the record, that he is confident he has the votes, even if Jeremy Corbyn says you've got to vote against it. So there are at least 20 Labour rebels who will vote with the government.
I've been talking to the Labour Party. We're very clear in our position. We're very clear about our conditions. And I would say that there are not those votes there available for the government. They should be looking on their own side if they want to get this through. And by the reaction, it looks to me as though they're in a lot of trouble.
Where do you stand yourself? Because I'm confused by the Labour position, frankly. All those people there are lining up to go into the Methodist Hall, 3,000 of them, hoping for a second referendum. Are you with them or are you against them?
Well, the position we've taken is look at the decision we're going to have to make. The deal, obviously, what we're talking about today, we'll vote that down if it doesn't meet our tests and call for a general election. If we don't get that, all options must be on the table, and that includes a public vote. That was the agreed position at conference. That's the roadmap for us as we go through these next few weeks, starting really with what's developing and breaking today.
So you could still back that second referendum?
Well, we've got a structured approach. We take each decision when we get to it, but in the event that the deal falls, in the event there isn't a general election, then yes, all options are on the table, and one of those is campaigning for a public vote. But we look at things as they arrive. It's a roadmap, it's a way through the difficult decisions we have to make over the next few months.
But if you are voting against this deal, if there aren't the Labour rebels to vote with the government. You are voting for party before country. You're prepared to see the pound plunge. You're prepared to see the economy go down the tubes because you want to have a general election.
I don't accept that. There is no national interest in voting for the wrong deal or a bad deal. And for the Prime Minister to say this is the best I could cobble together because I've had to have one eye on my cabinet, and you've got to now back a very bad deal because you get even worse, that is not acceptable.
Are you saying this is a vassal state deal?
I will wait and see the detail, but at the moment, I think this is unlikely to be the right deal for the country.
Right. Keir Starmer, thank you very much indeed. Well, even if there is now a deal on the table, there is absolutely no guarantee it'll get through Parliament, as you just heard, leaving businesses still uncertain about the future. Tonight, this programme has learned that one of Britain's biggest wholesale food suppliers, Bidfood, which supplies 40,000 customers, including schools, hospitals and supermarkets, is planning to stockpile in case there is no deal. It follows a similar move by Premier Foods, as our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, now reports.
Ah, the great British roast, where the family comes together and everything stops.
There might be the warm whiff of a deal emanating from Westminster tonight. It's not gravy, though, but gridlock at Britain's ports that's worrying the maker of Bisto.
Ah, Bisto.
Premier Foods said today it would begin stockpiling raw materials to protect itself in the event of a no deal. A £10 million hit it has no choice but to take. It's not just Premier. Behind me is one of 20 massive warehouses owned by Bidfood, one of Britain's biggest food wholesalers and suppliers to supermarkets, schools, restaurants, pubs and hotels. But 40% of the food that it distributes comes from abroad. And Channel 4 News has learned that it too plans to stockpile supplies in the event a deal cannot be reached. Bidfood tonight confirmed it was planning to hold up to 6 weeks' worth of critical stock, especially food used for meals in schools and hospitals. In a statement, it told this programme.
Bidfood has been shaping plans for some time. Our initial assessments have suggested that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, we may need an additional 7,000 pallets of stock. And like many other businesses, we're having to consider alternative warehousing locations to house contingency stock.
The food industry, just like cars and medicines, a stark example of the vulnerability of just-in-time supply chains. A source inside the supermarket Morrison's told us it was busy assessing other routes into the UK by air and sea if Dover grinds to a halt, saying it's their single biggest fear, given nearly a third of what we eat enters via Britain's busiest port. To help smooth that process, Channel 4 News has learned the government has also set aside additional funding to help deal with the onslaught of expected customs checks. The plans seen by this programme show an £8 million support package being prepared by the Treasury, designed, it says, to help the customs industry in the event of a no deal. £5 million is allocated to help fund training, another £3 million to support new technology. But the industry estimates up to 12,000 extra customs agents would be needed to handle as many as 100 million extra declarations. So many believe the money simply isn't enough and has come too late.
This £8 million for customs agencies is only a tiny drop in the ocean, and that's very late in the day. We're really concerned that lots of things won't be ready in time, and even the HMRC's own chief has said that any arrangements post the 29th of March will be suboptimal as far as customs is concerned.
Of course, any government intervention is welcome, but for some, like Premier Foods and Bidfood, perhaps too late. They're voting with their wallets and their pallets to keep the food flowing.
Well, joining me now is Tony Blair's former Director of Communications and now supporter of a second Brexit referendum, Alistair Campbell, and the Conservative MP and Chair of the European Research Group, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Welcome to you both. Jacob Rees-Mogg, you've been tweeting or saying tonight, white flags over Whitehall. What do you mean about that?
This is assuming that the RTE report is right, and it is deeply unsatisfactory that the first reports don't even come to British media, not to Channel 4 News, you would have thought should know first about something that is happening affecting the future of our nation. It goes to, what did I say?
All right. It
does, but it's primarily about the UK.
So you think it's surrender?
Well, everything we've heard, assuming it's accurate, is the white flags going up all over Whitehall, that the Customs Union would be harder to get out of under the backstop than it is under Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. The standards issue for Northern Ireland means that Dublin will have more say over the rules of Northern Ireland than London or Belfast, and we're paying £39 billion for what?
But
Who
you've
knows?
lost your battle, haven't you? She has outfoxed you. She has run down the clock, she's outfoxed you, and Julian Smith, the Chief Whip, has said that he's got the votes.
Well, I'll believe that when I see it. If you look at the votes against this already, the DUP are going to vote against it. We already have 51 members of the ERG who have gone online to say they will vote against it and stand up for Brexit. And you've got people like Joe Johnson, who are not in the ERG, saying that this sort of deal is vassalage. I think it's the job of the Chief Whip to be confident and say he can win, but he won't win on this. He will lose unless he gets the support of the Labour Party, but you've just heard from Sir Keir Starmer that he won't have that. There may be 20 Labour rebels, but our numbers are much stronger than that.
You agree with him, don't you?
I agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yes.
I agree.
In terms of the vassal state.
I think Joe Johnson spelt it out. It is vassalage, and we're giving money, and we're getting what in return. Now, Jacob and I might come at this from completely different perspectives, but I don't think anybody can pretend. There's not a single person in the country who voted either way in June the 23rd, 2016, who voted for this. And that's why I believe these thousands of people are queuing up tonight to go in to demand that it goes back to the people and they can actually say, is this what you voted?
But if there is a deal, if it goes through Cabinet, if it goes through Parliament, those people out there might as well go to the pub and not waste their time going to your meeting.
I don't agree with you at all, because I'm sorry to agree, well, not sorry, but I agree with Jacob on this one. I don't believe they will have the votes. I don't believe how anybody who voted Brexit can support this, and I don't believe how any Labour MP can actually support this either.
Right. Are you going to make news tonight, Jacob Rees-Mogg, by swinging behind a second referendum? It's the only way out. Second referendum, go back to the country, make your case.
A second referendum is a loser's referendum. We've had the referendum, it was won by Leave. We then had a general election where both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party said that they were committed to implementing the result of the referendum. And that's what we should do. We owe it to democracy to implement the result of the referendum, the biggest vote in our nation's history, not to change it just because a few people who lost are unhappy.
Is the consequence of everything that is happening today a permanent split in the Tory party, the end of the Tory party as we know it?
I think there is a risk that we are in 1846 territory. That if the Prime Minister wishes to push ahead with this, if the Cabinet doesn't stop her, it is very divisive for the Conservative Party, though the Labour Party is quite split as well.
It is quite split, isn't it? But Jeremy Corbyn is determined not to give you what you want.
Well, he seems to be at the moment, but again, Jeremy Corbyn, there are lots of facets to Jeremy Corbyn. One of them is that he says he listens to the members. Labour Party members, by a massive majority, want this put back to the people, and if it is put back to the people, they want to remain in the European Union. And I suspect that where we are heading, actually, is to a debate, the country deciding, do you want no deal and all the chaos that it brings, or do you actually want no Brexit, which is what all these people want?
I mean, we're in the heart of Westminster, Westminster Abbey, the Houses of Parliament, 10 Downing Street, this meeting here tonight. This is the fulcrum of British politics today. We are at a very perilous moment for this country, aren't we? Whatever happens.
You're absolutely right. Today is potentially a pivotal moment. Assume that what's been leaked is accurate and the future of our nation for a generation is being determined, and it is being determined badly and against so much of what the Prime Minister herself said, that she said we would be out of the customs union, that no Prime Minister could divide up Northern Ireland and that we would take back control of our laws, our money and our borders. This is not what's happening, and we need to get back to what the Prime Minister promised the electorate. She must stick to her word.
But she is also the Prime Minister of all Britons. She was elected to represent the entire country, a country that is hopelessly and bitterly divided. Isn't the only thing she can do is to come up with a compromise that leaves everyone unhappy, but the majority of people not totally distraught?
And that's what she's tried to do, and she's failing to do that. She, I think, has gone into this thinking, right, you've got people like me over here who, think this is a terrible thing that's happening to the country and you have to do what you can to stop it. People over there like Jacob who think no deal is fine. And she's sort of saying, I'll try and do something in the middle. But there's something in the middle doesn't add up.
What would you have done differently in her position?
In her position, I think the problem was, when she, after the referendum, she came out and instead of actually trying to bring the country together, I think she went far too far to try to keep Jacob's people happy.
And look what's happened. He's just as unhappy as he was.
Because she cannot deliver what it is that Jacob and his people want, and therefore she's ended up pleasing absolutely nobody.
You can never be satisfied, can you, Jacob, when it comes to this?
What I would say is that she should have listened, actually, to Michel Barnier, who said very clearly at the beginning, you can be a member of the European Union or you can be a third country. And the government has tried to argue for a middle course that nobody was offering. She should either have backed our stuff or she should back my position. This middle muddle fiddle fuddle is not working and is humiliating for the nation.
Middle muddle fiddle fuddle. If there's another referendum, right, if it does come to that, the country surely will be just as divided then as it is now.
Well, the country is divided, and if you did have another referendum on the outcome of the negotiations, then of course there'd be a bitter debate. But what I think has been really interesting about this referendum is the country is just not uniting around it at all. And I think what would happen, we had an ill-informed debate, we had a lot of lies told, we had a lot of fantasies peddled. We now do have a more informed electorate. I think we can have an informed debate between, I suspect it will be between no deal or no Brexit.
No middle muddle fiddle fuddle here. We're trying to be as crystal clear as possible. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Alistair Campbell, thank you very much indeed.
Two more quick ones for you. Matthew Whitaker, appointed Attorney General, that's being challenged in the courts. Maryland lawyers saying the President can't do that without informing and indeed involving Congress. And finally, the eminence grise himself, Robert Mueller. One source who's been questioned by the Mueller investigation says that they want to know more information about one individual. That individual, one Nigel Farage. Quite a morning. Back to you.
Welcome back to Westminster, where there is finally a draft Brexit divorce deal on the table. Only a handful of ministers have seen it so far, but that hasn't stopped the speculation about who might support it and who might vote it down. Meanwhile, behind me, thousands of Remain supporters are at a rally demanding a second referendum to let the people decide, a people's vote. Plenty more has been happening on the Brexit front today as well. A no-deal Brexit would cost the NHS £2.3 billion, according to the Nuffield Trust. It says red tape and trade barriers will push up the cost of everything, from MRI scanners to syringes to drugs. The Trust calculates this would absorb all the money available for improvements in patient care for the next 2 years. Britons travelling to the EU after Brexit won't need a visa, even if there's no deal, the European Commission has decided. But the arrangement depends on the UK extending the same courtesy to EU citizens. However, UK nationals will be barred from the fast lanes at airports that'll be reserved for EU citizens and the Swiss. But EU workers here seem to be feeling less welcome. The number working in the UK has fallen by 4.5%, the sharpest decline since records began more than 20 years ago. And the Office for National Statistics says the fall seems to be accelerating. There are 136 days left to Brexit. Now for some voices that you rarely hear from in the Brexit debate. More than 600,000 children live in the UK who were born elsewhere in the EU. Many of them came to Britain years ago and now consider this place home. So what does Brexit mean for these young people who are still trying to find their place in the world? Our Scotland correspondent, Kieran Jenkins, has been finding out.
This is my family, the Horvath family. And this is my mum, Ursula, and we are the Novak family.
This is my brother, and this is my mum, and my dad's at work, and that's my family.
If you thought you'd heard it all on Brexit, come into these homes. Meet these young people.
What are you going to be, Kitty?
I'm going to be a Broadway star.
Born in Eastern Europe,
Meow.
raised in Scotland.
Half of me is Polish and half of it's not, I guess.
A voice, they say, almost entirely missing from the Brexit debate.
I don't think it's been heard at all, at least not by the politicians.
It's tea time in Airdrie for Kitty's family. She's one of more than 600,000 children living in the UK who were born elsewhere in the EU.
How would you describe your nationality?
It's really hard because I'm always like, I'm Hungarian, I was born there and I'll always be Hungarian. But at the same time, I feel pretty Scottish sometimes.
In the East End of Glasgow, student Marta and her mum.
Do you ever feel sort of torn between the two different parts of your identity?
Yeah, when I go to Poland, I feel
sort of like an outcast because like my accent's a bit different when I speak Polish as well.
Because
And in Dalgety Bay in Fife, 13-year-old Olivia.
like people that don't necessarily know me that much, when they find out that I'm not from here, they're kind of surprised. It kind of feels nice that I know that someone would think I'm from here.
Brexit will not be the biggest event in these young lives.
So, when you came to Scotland, how much English could you speak?
Like 2 words.
They've been turned upside down once already.
How important was it to you at the start to feel like that you fitted in?
Quite a lot, like it was quite important to me.
When she came to Scotland, Kitty was 9. Her father found work as a plumber. Her mother sorts recycled clothes.
1 or 2 times when I'm on the train talking to my mum in Hungarian, like I was on the phone and this woman just started shouting at me saying, "You're in an English-speaking country, why don't you just learn the language?" I just felt really angry, like why would you say stuff like that? You don't know me. And I can speak English, I speak English perfectly fine.
A recent University of Strathclyde study of over 1,000 Eastern European children living in Britain found more than 3/4 had experienced some kind of racist abuse.
I did get a few comments like at the start, people would call me like a Polish cow and stuff like that, but it doesn't really,
They call you a Polish cow.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
Like 11 or 12.
For these young people, does Brexit feel personal?
Well, I feel like I'm part of the club right now, but I feel like the members of that club are trying to get rid of me. That's what I'm feeling right now. So I feel like, I love the club. I love the club so much, but I feel like the members of the club are trying to get rid of me.
How does it affect how Hungarian you feel?
I just feel like I have to become more Scottish now to fit in with British society and just try to fit in here to make sure I can stay here.
What does that mean, trying to be more Scottish?
Just to act like more like them and act less like Hungarians so they'll accept me more.
After Brexit, each of these families will be asked to register for what the government calls settled status.
Do you know what the process is after Brexit for what you need to do in terms of the legal stuff?
No, not at all. Does anyone know?
They may find settled status confusing, but all these families say they would apply. The government has been warned it risks a second Windrush generation among thousands who may not. Marta, whose mum also works in a clothes sorting factory, would sooner become a British citizen. Cost for each person, over £1,000.
As soon as the Brexit vote happened, we looked into it and stuff. It's so expensive, and we just wouldn't. It's not something we would be able to afford right now.
For Marta, Kitty and Olivia, Brexit is coming fast. And the world they thought they knew is changing all over again.
I want someone to tell me that I am safe in this country or I'm not going to get kicked out. I just want certainty.
Well, it's been a day of fast-moving events here in Westminster, including in the hall behind me, the Methodist Hall, where 3,000 people are cheering for another referendum, a people's vote. And I'm told that Gary Lineker is about to appear on stage endorsing a second referendum. And let's go to the other Gary, the original Gary, Gary Gibbon. Is that going to make a difference, Gary Lineker on stage?
Promising name. What happens now is that Theresa May is going to try and get this through Cabinet, get it through the DUP as well, who prop up her majority, and then we know, if she can do that, big if, she wants to do a selling programme in the country because she hopes that through the country she can breathe down the necks of the potential rebels in her own party. And we have a bit of a clue as to what that looks like because there was a leak last week. It involves speeches around the countries, all sorts of rallying cries, getting business involved hugely, and that starts tomorrow. She's going to be doing a bit of that, and then we build up to this debate and vote potentially 2 or 3 weeks away. It's going to be tumultuous in the build-up, and of course if she loses, potentially even more tumultuous.
Gary Gibbon, thank you very much indeed. Tumultuous indeed. Extraordinary 2 weeks ahead, and perhaps even longer.
Few people had even seen the text. Fewer still have read it through. Yet already the tribes are marking their turf, drums beating, spears at the ready. Those voices from hardline Brexiteers joined by those of hardened Remainers. The question now is whether there are enough of them from either side to worry the Prime Minister. She's worked hard to come up with a perfect compromise, a compromise that may end up pleasing no one. Tonight, Theresa May's been calling in the trickier members of her cabinet to see if she can entice them on board. She'll tell them a technical document outlining a withdrawal agreement has been put together with a political statement alongside it. It will go before the full cabinet tomorrow and ultimately to Parliament after that. So who's on board, who's out and who's undecided? We have a full studio. But first, our political editor, Nick Watt, has been counting them all in and out Downing Street.
It's been a long wait, but finally we've reached what Theresa May is calling the end game. But is this the end of a successful negotiation, or will this mark the personal end game for the Prime Minister? Tomorrow, the Cabinet will be asked in Downing Street to approve a 500-page legally binding Brexit withdrawal agreement covering Northern Ireland, the divorce settlement and citizens' rights. We are promised the meeting will be a friendly affair.
You've been twisting some arms, Mr. Smith?
No, I didn't twist any arms. It's exciting. We're getting closer to a deal.
To sweeten the pill for Brexiteers, there will also be a draft document setting out the nature of the UK's future relationship with the EU. Theresa May says this will allow the UK to sign its own trade deals. The Prime Minister will tell colleagues that she hopes to sign the overall deal at an EU summit on the 25th of November. She's also planning to say that she has secured a big win with the EU. A Brussels plan for a border down the Irish Sea has been scrapped in favour of a UK-wide customs agreement, sources say. But the Democratic Unionist Party is voicing concerns that Northern Ireland may be treated differently to the rest of the UK in some areas.
She said that she would never be the Prime Minister who oversaw the breakup of the United Kingdom, and when the Cabinet considers this deal, the Cabinet has to ask itself, do we want to be the British Cabinet which give authorisation for a deal to go to the House of Commons which will ensure the breakup of the United Kingdom? We said we would work with the Conservative Party to deliver stable government for the next 5 years. If the Conservative Party decides to go down the road of delivering that kind of EU arrangement for our Brexit arrangement for the future, then we don't have common ground with them anymore.
In Downing Street tonight, Theresa May is holding one-to-one meetings with Cabinet Ministers to sell her deal. Aides know this is a moment of monumental significance for her and the country. Having finally laid her cards on the table, the Prime Minister now faces a showdown with her Cabinet and her party.
It's interesting times in
Brexiteers are determined to kill off the plan.
It's been 2.5 years since we voted to leave the EU, and quite frankly, the government has made a mess of this. I've seen on the Brexit committee with the evidence sessions that's been coming through, but also the fact is we haven't played our strongest hand. When we leave the EU, we'll be the biggest trading partner, bigger than China, bigger than the US, and we haven't played our strong cards. So if the Prime Minister comes back with a checkers type of deal that keeps us in the customs union, it will be an abomination of Brexit, and she will be betraying the British people.
Supporters of the Prime Minister are hailing her efforts.
Negotiations of any importance are tough, and this is a very important issue, and these have been very tough negotiations. But the Prime Minister has always been, he's got a reputation for being hardworking and dogged and determined, and I think that's what has got us this far, and I think she'll probably have to keep those attributes at the forefront as we move forward. But as I say, the fact that we've got a text, it's going before Cabinet, indicates we've taken a big step in the right direction, and I hope the EU have been pragmatic, and I hope that we've got a deal that sticks.
Labour is indicating it is prepared to vote down the deal, raising the prospect that it could be defeated if Brexiteers stand firm.
I think it's very unlikely we'll be supporting them because she's made clear all along she's not interested in the kind of comprehensive customs union that's been our policy for some time,
or a new deal with the single market. Frankly, if she can't deliver, if she can't get Parliament to support her, then there should be a general election and a change of government. That's the fundamental that we will be pushing for.
Theresa May hopes the endgame is now in sight. But is this actually the start of another gruelling chapter in the Brexit journey with an unknown ending?
So what happens next? Will we see cabinet resignations over this deal? We have Nick Watt in Downing Street still. Talk us through what you're hearing, Nick.
Well, there are some very gloomy cabinet ministers tonight. I'm hearing phrases like this is very difficult to stomach. It will be even more difficult than they had thought to sell to Parliament. Now, I know of a reasonable number of Brexit cabinet ministers who, through gritted teeth, are going to stay on board and they're going to accept this. But there are others who are reflecting very deeply and very carefully overnight. Now, their concerns in particular are over Northern Ireland. Now, Downing Street is very happy. They say they've got rid of that EU idea of a border down the Irish Sea. There will be, as they're saying, a UK-wide customs arrangement. Now, there are some ministers who are saying, I've looked at this and I can see some Northern Ireland specific elements. And I have to say that is also the view from Brussels. Talking to sources there, they say yes, a UK-wide customs arrangement, but there will be some specific Northern Ireland elements.
I'm going to let you chase Andrea Leadsom, who just walked behind you, in a second, Nick. But before I do, I'm going to go to you for the maths. Have you done the calculations, and do you think that the Prime Minister can get this through Parliament?
Well, that unease over Northern Ireland does make the calculations very difficult. Arlene Foster, the DUP leader tonight, has said any trade barriers between Northern Ireland and Great Britain would not be acceptable to the DUP. Now, voting this down would be a huge step for the DUP, because that could potentially put Jeremy Corbyn in the frame to be Prime Minister, so they might think very hard about that. But where we are at the moment is it does look like we have an alliance between Conservative Brexiteers and the Labour Party who want to vote that down. But I was speaking to one close cabinet colleague of the Prime Minister, and they told me it would be quite a step for the Labour Party to do that, because if the Prime Minister gets this agreed at that EU summit on the 25th of November, it will be agreed by the EU. That will be a semi-legal process under Article 50. Quite difficult to see how the Labour Party, if it got into government, would then renegotiate that. So what this minister was saying is if Labour votes this down, they could be enabling no deal.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. As you can see, we're keeping our beady eyes on the door behind Nick, and we'll return to it if we hear news from there. But first of all, let's bring in our panel. Three people of incredibly different persuasions who all agree on one thing: May's proposal doesn't work. Jacob Rees-Mogg, you'll recognise, the leader of the European Research Group, a leading Brexiteer Tory. Chukwuemeka, a Labour voice supporting a second vote. Dominic Grieve, a Conservative Remainer, also supporting another vote. And I'm going to give whoever of you tells me that you are supporting this proposal the first response.
Well, what proposal?
Right.
What proposal? Okay. I mean, everybody is referring to this as a deal. We were promised by the Prime Minister in her Lancaster House speech last year that by this stage we would have a fully agreed future trading relationship. We are not going to get that. That is all in this political declaration, which is a statement of aspiration, but we won't know what the future trading relationship looks like until after we've left. And for your viewers who think, for God's sake, can you guys not just get this done, get this off the table? We're going to have at least another 3 to 4 years of negotiation on that future trading relationship, and we will have paid more than £40 billion in terms of a divorce bill with no guarantees in return. Now, to most people watching this programme, hang on a minute, why are you going to pay £40 billion divorce bill and you haven't got your trading relationship in return?
And you two Tory gentlemen have nothing to disagree with Chuka on that line. You're all in the same boat on this, right?
I don't disagree with Chuka at all about that. I think it's the real problem. This started out with talking about an implementation period at the end. Then it's shifted to a transition, and in truth, the likelihood is, although it can't be certain till we've seen the deal, that the future trading relationship is so opaque, plus it being hedged in with restrictions in terms of what the United Kingdom can do constitutionally, that makes me very, very uneasy about it.
So, strange bedfellows, but you are all going to vote this down as you understand the proposal now. Jacob?
Yes, and I agree with what's been said So far, the problem is that the Prime Minister promised one thing and is delivering another. Mr Amuna was absolutely right. The Prime Minister said there would be an implementation period to implement something that had been agreed. This has now become an endless, undated negotiation period for which we're paying £40 billion.
And yet...
It's completely incompetent and it's not what we were promised.
But you know at this stage you are playing with fire. You, Jacob, may celebrate no deal. That's the direction you've been pushing in.
No, it's not quite true. I've always thought we shouldn't be afraid of no deal. And the Prime Minister has consistently said no deal is better than a bad deal. I'm afraid to say that the deal that is being proposed at the moment shows that she didn't really believe this, because this deal is so bad that it's hard to think of anything that could be worse.
Just one second. You've always played the ball, not the man, person, woman. Will you now write a letter to the 1922 committee saying it's done?
I haven't written to Sir Graham Brady. But there comes a point at which the policy and the individual become so intimately connected that it will be very hard to carry on supporting the person who is promoting this policy.
Do you expect to be writing a letter in the next 24 hours?
Not in the next 24 hours.
Well, the problem is, Jacob talks about promises. The Prime Minister has been trying to deliver on the impossible promises that people like Jacob have been making for the last 2 to 3 years. And, you know, I think it's an incompetent government, but even the most competent government could not deliver Brexit in the terms that people like Jacob's
holding. So isn't it then important for you, as a moderate or somebody who doesn't feel extreme about one way, as you think Jacob does, to stand up for something that gets the country through this
Well,
period?
the problem is, and I think this is the problem with people like Jacob, is that, you know, the ERG, who basically are 40 MPs out of 650, they will huff and they will puff, but in the end, if they blow the house down, the arithmetic is not going to stack up for the kind of extreme Brexit that they want. And the problem is, in fairness to Jacob, he could say to me, well, look, you want a people's vote on the deal, which I do. And at the moment, the arithmetic, some would say, doesn't stack up either. And this goes to the heart of the problem for your viewers. There is an impasse in Parliament, and I don't see how you resolve that, if not by referring
You
it back
are
to the
all
people.
blowing the house down. Let's be absolutely clear. And Dominic Grieve, you came on the programme last week and talked about country before party. You're going to fail the country on this one, possibly, and put Jeremy Corbyn in power.
I don't think that will happen if Parliament asserts its collective voice about what it wants. I mean, the difficulty with this is that unless you believe in Jacob's vision of the future outside of the EU, which I'm afraid I don't share, it's an economic vision which I think is shared by very few people in this country, then every conceivable form of Brexit on offer is third-rate compared to remaining in the EU. And what I'm not prepared to do is to simply allow us to drift out of the EU into a third-rate relationship where we're going to continue to argue over the future relationship long after the 29th of March. And I prefer to precipitate, yes, you can say, be a cause of a greater level of crisis now, because in my view, it's better that we resolve this now than end up in a situation where in a year's time, the public no one is thanking us for what we have delivered from any court.
And that's the difference, Jacob, that the gentlemen on either side of you believe that what we have is infinitely preferable to the place we are going next, and you end up looking like the person who is out of touch, who doesn't care enough about jobs, who doesn't care enough about the poorer people in this country to take them into this place.
17.4 million people on my side who voted to leave.
And they've got 16-1, which is not an insignificant figure either.
They lost. That's the key point. It's a democracy.
But there's still 16 million people in this country.
It's a democracy. When you have a vote, you implement the result of that vote. When you have a general election, the party that wins the election forms the government. The British people voted to leave. They heard all these arguments.
But you're not getting what you want. You just said that.
Dominic has been completely consistent in saying it is better to remain in the European Union. That was not what people decided to do. They decided that they wanted the freedom of choice outside the European Union to make their own economic path. That was a matter that they were legitimately entitled to decide. It was a democratic result, and I don't believe the government is delivering either on the referendum result or on the general election result when both main parties said they would implement the referendum.
We are talking about the purity of democracy. We're talking about what's on the table right now.
Your version of Brexit was put to the British people at the general election last year in the expectation it would increase your majority. And in fact, you are now a minority government. And the problem is, that the real problem is, none of us actually knows what the people want right now. You're talking about a referendum which happened over 2 years ago, which was based on us having a hypothetical debate about what would happen in 2018. Whereas now we know the reality of the situation. And you completely ignore, by the way, the 2 million younger people in this country who haven't had a vote on this at all, who are going to suffer the consequences longer than any other group.
We do know that they want the country and the politicians and Parliament to get on with it now and stop us having this debate.
But the problem is, as I said, I don't disagree with that. There is an impasse.
And getting on with it is impossible unless there is a level of consensus, which is wholly absent, which is why we should have a people's vote, because that's probably the only thing that will resolve it.
If we have a second vote, we'll want a third. A second vote will solve absolutely nothing.
We're going to move on. Much of the focus so far in talks of any deal has been, as Nick was saying a little earlier, that idea of a difference in status between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Our business editor, Helen Thomas, is here. This is the sticking points of sticking points. Helen, do you think it's resolvable?
Well, I think we need to make clear that nobody knows what's in this thing at the moment, and you're talking about hundreds of pages of dense legal text. So even the people who have seen it probably don't really know what's in it. But what seems to be the case is that at the end of transition, you potentially enter this backstop if the future relationship isn't ready to guarantee no hard border on the island of Ireland, a UK-wide customs union and potentially some specific Northern Ireland arrangements around goods regulation. Now, rather, as we've just heard, different people can object to that for different reasons. That could mean the expansion of checks on goods, particularly food, agri-products, travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. There are already checks on live animals, but this would expand that potentially. Others might have the broader objection that by keeping the UK in a customs union for longer, it limits our freedom of movement, it limits our ability to pursue an independent trade policy. What we don't know, and we won't know until we've waded through 500 odd pages of legal text, is what is in there that might help them sell this deal? What can they claim as a victory? Secondly is what support, who does swing behind this? So business, who at this stage are just desperate to get into transition and take no deal off the table, do they swing behind this? And can they sell the line that this is how you avoid no deal?
OK. Helen, thanks very much. It's all about selling that line. There are plenty of people here, as you've heard, who won't give that proposal their vote. But let's turn now to Damien Green, former First Secretary and a close ally of Theresa May. I'm assuming you haven't read 500 pages of small print since 4 o'clock this afternoon, Damien.
Well, like everyone else, I haven't seen this. And what I find fascinating is that we get a degree of hyperbole about how this is going to reduce us to slave status. From people who've not read a single word of this documentation. I think everyone should spend this evening calming down. And what I thought was a really illuminating discussion between 3 friends of mine. And what the lesson we must take from this is that absolutism is not going to work in this context. We are doing a negotiation with friendly other countries. All negotiations end in a compromise. If people start saying, I haven't got 100% of what I want, therefore I'm going to pull the temple down, then we will get nowhere in this country and politics will be the worst. Parliamentary democracy will have been seen to have failed. It is really important that people step back and stay calm.
But percentages add up. And if all of them have enough people for their own reason to vote against this, then the Prime Minister will not get this one through. Do you worry now that this vote won't pass?
Well, I've always worried that it might not pass, but the lesson I draw from everything that's happened over the past 6 or 7 hours of feverish politics in Westminster is that this is a very important decision for every individual MP in every party. And we all need to look at what I understand is a 500-page document, plus what I also understand is a more meaty political declaration about the future, which actually does give quite a clear sense of direction about the type of trade deal we will have. And I know a lot of people have legitimately worried that there would be too much fudge in that, it would be a pig in a poke, all those kinds of things. Are we spending 39 billion for nothing? And actually, let's all read it and see whether it does give us a clear sense of direction.
You're assuming there is a moderate approach to this which allows for compromise and people to have their minds made up. It may not be the case. We may be past that point. The Prime Minister needs 320 votes, I think, to win, and she is relying on the support from about 240 Tories, a few more from Labour, although they've been whipped to vote against it. where does the rest of that support come from now? Like, where does she go to change people's minds?
Perhaps, I would hope that more Conservatives will, when they actually see the deal, think this is perfectly reasonable. And the truth is, everyone in every party is going to have to say, is this the perfect deal? Is this exactly what I would have written?
Do you think that Dominic Grieve, do you think that Chukwuemeka, do you think either of those wings could be persuaded now in the next few days?
I mean, whether Chuck or Dominic will, or indeed Jacob, I think each individual is going to need to take their own decision. And I think that the danger, as it were, for each side of this argument is what they risk. It seems to me extraordinary that some of the more enthusiastic Brexiters are conceivably going to snatch defeat from the jaws of their victory by presumably precipitating what they want to destroy this, and therefore conceivably lead to a second referendum, which I think would be terrible. It would be divisive without being decisive, but I think might well actually reverse Brexit. Surely Jacob can't want that. But actually, I just think if we try to step back and look at this in a sort of mature way, the vote was 52% to 48%. The message that sends to me is clearly we've got to leave, and I campaigned on the other side, but we can't leave in a way that is extreme.
Though, she is guilty, though, of laying down her red lines in a certain way and of saying phrases like a bad deal is better than no deal. You don't believe that now, do you?
Well, a deal that broke up the United Kingdom, which appears at some stage to have been on some of the Europeans' lines, would clearly be worse than no deal. But I think no deal would be disastrous. I don't want there to be no deal. And we now have a deal. So let's look at it calmly, and that would be better than the absolutist alternatives we're being presented with.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, some parties are planning for the next stage of the parliamentary battle over Brexit. The Scottish National Party, along with the leaders of the Labour, the Lib Dems and Plaid, have come together to demand a change to Commons procedure to make sure that MPs will have the right to amend the so-called meaningful vote on the Brexit deal, and their Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, is here tonight. From your perspective, at the moment, do you think that the SNP will stop this deal? Before we get on to what they can amend or can't amend, will you vote against it?
Yes, we will vote against it because it doesn't meet our test. What we've said from day one is that we must have the least damaging Brexit. At the very minimum, that must be about staying in the single market and the customs union.
Do you understand why, sorry to interrupt, Ian, but do you understand why you can say we will vote against it and why Labour is not that clear? Do you find Labour helpful on this?
Well, look, I mean, I will congratulate Jeremy that he's come together with us in the action we've taken in the joint letter, but I'm afraid to say Labour's position on this is as clear as mud. I don't think there is any clarity from Labour. I think we need to make sure that we show leadership in the House of Commons. I've always argued that there is a majority in the House of Commons to stay in the single market and the customs union. I want us to be able to give voice to that. And I think on the basis of what we know, because we need to go back to the referendum, people were not told what the real consequences of Brexit would be. We know the problems that we've got with Vote Leave. We know the problems that we've had with Aaron Banks and the criminal investigation that's taking place. People were not told the truth as to what Brexit was going to do. And one thing which is very important, Emily, is that we know from the analysis of the UK government, from the Scottish government and others, that if we're out with the single market and the customs union, it's going to cost jobs. I would say to every individual MP, be careful about the responsibilities that you have to your constituents. And all of us have the responsibility that we have to protect the jobs and the livelihoods of people throughout the United
SNP
Kingdom.
is the largest party in the UK that has been consistently consistently in favour of a single market. What do you think has stopped you making that a more solid parliamentary body then? I mean, why isn't it a very easy position if you've got the whole of the SNP and clearly a lot of floating Labour voters and many of the other smaller parties too?
I understand that MPs have a loyalty to their party, and that's admirable that is the case. I know from talking to MPs throughout Parliament that many people see that staying in the single market and the customs union is the least worst option. And I want to make sure that we've got the opportunity to vote for that when we have the discussion on the meaningful vote. And at that point, MPs have got to look very carefully at what is in the interests of their own constituents.
So the amendment question that you've raised now, where is that sitting? What answers have you had to that?
At the moment, what I would say is on the basis of where we are, that we know there's a deal coming forward, this is the end of the phony war. This is where it starts to get real. And this is where we start to talk about the impact this is going to have on people. That's the important point and the responsibilities that we have. Theresa May isn't really helping anyone with this deal that's come forward. It is a blind Brexit, because at the end of the day, we don't know what the long-term relationship is going to be. It doesn't help in building confidence and getting investment into the economy. There has to be change. This deal has to be stopped as it is.
Ian Blackford, thank you very much indeed. Now, before we look at the papers, we're going to go back to Downing Street. We sent Newsnight's John Sweeney down there to see if he could get any answers out of any of the Cabinet summoned to number 10. Could he?
Deal or no deal, Minister? Deal or no deal? Whoever you are. Deal or no deal, Chancellor? Deal or no deal? Is Brexit going to work for the country? Well, that's a no reply too. Hiya. Hello. BBC Newsnight. Deal or no deal, sir? Deal or no deal? Any clue as to your thinking? Total silence. Deal or no deal?
Deal, of course. I'm the Chief Whip. We'll be looking forward to delivering this in Parliament.
So that's a promise, there will be a deal. Smashing, thank you. So, deal, says the Chief Whip.
And if John Sweeney can't get answers, no one can. Let's take you through tomorrow's front pages. Now, there is a resounding decision by The Sun to put Brexit miles away. We've got the whole of the, well, not the whole, but quite a large portion of the royal family there. As their political editor said, they do want to sell some papers tomorrow. The Guardian has got Brexit. May tells her cabinet, this is the deal, now back me. With 4 faces there, we are, of course, waiting to see if there are any resignations. And the Mail has clearly followed or decided that the Sun's on the right money here. How old are you now, Grandpa? That's George's cheeky chuckles for Charles at 70. But Judgment Day is their headline. May strikes a historic Brexit deal. She calls in Cabinet one by one to plead for support. Tory rebels cry betrayal. Now, to dissect the day, I'm joined by Tom Newton-Dunn, political editor for The Sun, and Aisha Hazarika, columnist for the Evening Standard and former advisor to Ed Miliband, talk through some of tomorrow's headlines. Tom, you got bumped to the edge of your paper by the royal family, but what do you expect? Do you think you're going to have resignations tomorrow?
And it was a bumping I was quite happy to do, knowing that we still have papers to sell. I think Thursday's paper is going to be the big dissection of precisely what this deal really means. We've still got a day of royal family to go. Resignation side has been really interesting. Since the bubble went up and the news went out about the deal, we've been blasting the phones all night, working out which cabinet ministers have been in to read the document, which cabinet ministers have been in to read the document and see Theresa May. I think there's still some who'll be having their audience with the Prime Minister tomorrow morning. Penny Mordaunt, I understand, will be going till then. Judgment very much reserved tonight. I understand that so far that there are pivotal 4 or 5 members of the cabinet. There's Dominic Raab, the Brexit Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, and Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, with maybe the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox.
Well, they're definitely staying. Or...
Any one of those 5 walks, and the Prime Minister's got a massive problem, because any one of those 5 potentially can mount a credible leadership challenge and try and sink her. I think, I'm told, friends close to them, etc., that all 5 will stay and will begrudgingly, with various degrees, back the Prime Minister. So that is probably the pivotal balance she needs.
And Aisha, when you look at Labour now, and they've been playing a very fine sort of balancing act on this, and rightly saying they want to look through the print and the 500 pages and all the rest of it, is there any chance, do you think, that they could back the Prime Minister on this? Because if they do suddenly get behind it, she's safe.
Well, I was quite interested to hear what Barry just said in your interview with him, saying, well, let's have a look and see. I mean, I've just been at a Labour event tonight, and the mood there, you know, the Labour mood has been very upset over the weekend, because you have Jeremy Corbyn coming out in his German newspaper interview saying we cannot stop Brexit. You've had the party membership who were very much moved into the right place after party conference, a lot of chicanery and moving everyone into the right position. Then Jeremy Corbyn saying, well, actually, we can't do anything about Brexit. Tonight, the mood is very febrile, but it is interesting. You know, people are saying no, surely not. There's no conceivable way that the Labour Party can prop up Theresa May. But then you hear Barry Garden saying, well, let's look at the detail. In my gut, I think it would be extraordinary for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party to save the Prime Minister at this most dangerous point for her.
There is a sort of psychological test, isn't there, whereby when you're actually given something that is a deal or a proposal, however imperfect, you just sort of go, whatever, you know, let's take it because we all want to start another conversation. Do you think we're at that tipping point as a country?
Funnily enough, I think that's precisely what the Prime Minister's strongest hand will be. So she's got enraged people. You saw Dominic Grieve, Jacob Rees-Mogg, a whole load of MPs now. No way is the mathematics going to work in the Commons to get this deal through at the moment. However, I think the meaningful vote won't happen until, you know, maybe mid-December. So she's got 4 weeks now for a very bored nation and bored
pre-Christmas
to come in and say, just get on with it.
I think this narrative that, oh, everybody's just really bored and no one cares about it, I don't think that's quite right. I think actually, as it's coming to the point of fruition and you have a deal which Remainers hate, Brexiteers hate, cannot command a majority in Parliament, is still quite
political
unclear.
wins. What about the rump of the country?
I think the rump of the country is just looking... Well, first of all, I think the rump of the country is looking at politics with even more hatred and loathing and dismay than it's ever had. To think that we cannot sort this out is ridiculous. I think businesses are now starting to get really worried, because for them it's not just a matter of, oh, let's have a chat in the pub about politics. This is, where is the certainty about what's happening? What is the clarity? You know, how is this going to affect our businesses?
Well, thank you both. If you're right, we'll have a whole programme on the Royals tomorrow night. That's a promise. That's all we have time for.